Good morning, my dear friends. My name is K. Umesh Rao. Today's subject is Land Acquisition Act. In this topic, we are discussing what is the meaning of land acquisition, what is the difference between Land Acquisition Act 1894 and Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation Act of 2013. What is the necessity of introduction of LARR Act 2013? Scope of the legislation of Land Acquisition Act 2013. Procedure for land acquisition under LARR Act 2013. The objective of Land Acquisition Act and meaning of public purpose. What is the meaning of Land Acquisition Act? Land acquisition means government acquires land from the private persons for the development purposes. In return, the government pays suitable compensation to the landowner. The government will take care of the rehabilitation and resettlement of the affected landowners and others. It governs the entire process of land acquisition. There are two sets of Land Acquisition Acts. One, Land Acquisition Act 1894, and this 1894 Act was replaced by LARR Act of 2013. What is the difference between Land Acquisition Act 1894 and LARR Act 2013? In Land Acquisition of 1894, rehabilitation and resettlement is not mentioned. Fair compensation is based on the whims and fancies of the collector. Social impact assessment is not taken into account. Payment of compensation depends upon the discretion of the collector. Acquisition in case of national emergency, natural calamity is not mentioned. Person who lost land under new act will get just and fair compensation. Old act says only just and reasonable compensation. Under old act, no provision for resettlement. Under new act, adequate provision for resettlement is made. So what is the necessity of introduction of Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation Act? Old legislation of land acquisition 1894 was not good. Legislation was introduced by British people and intention is beneficial to the British government. Old legislation is not catering the need of the people. Number of agitations took place. People resisted and protested against old legislation. Old legislation does not speak of rehabilitation and resettlement. It is purely collector's discretion to grant compensation. When acquisition process started, landowners are least consulted. Tribals were displaced multiple times. 1/3 of the people lost their land and they never got compensation, nor they were resettled. Acquired land was not used for the specific purpose. Thousands of acres of land were taken in the name of the development and it is unutilized. Social impact assessment was not at all mentioned. Acquisition in case of national emergency, natural calamity not mentioned. Persons lost land under the new act will get just and fair compensation. Old act says only just and reasonable compensation. All these reasons led to the new legislation called Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation Act 2013. What is the scope of the Land Acquisition, Resettlement and Rehabilitation Act 2013? Here, land acquisition is for public purpose. What is the public purpose? It means general intention of the community is taken into account, not the interest of the individual is taken into account. Food security. Government should give up acquisition of land to the extent possible if it is multi-crop land or highly irrigated land. Government should acquire only such land as a last resort with conditions. Rehabilitation and resettlement of these persons displaced. People who lost their land due to the acquisition should be provided rehabilitation and resettlement. Land acquisition is as per the prescribed procedure. Creation of a national monetary authority. Central government for national or interstate projects constitute a national monitoring committee for monitoring the implementation of rehabilitation and resettlement schemes. And last one is the payment of compensation. Payment of compensation to the people who lost their land should be taken into account. Now, procedure for Land Acquisition Act. Land acquisition at state level. That means state government acquire land for the purpose of development. Land acquisition at national level. Central government acquire land. Another category, land acquisition for temporary purposes. It means land is not required permanently. Temporary means acquisition of a land for a period of not more than 3 years. It means land is not required permanently. Example, putting temporary sheds for disabled in communal violence people in a safe place. Second, land acquisition for permanent purposes. Acquisition of permanent purposes means acquisition for own purposes and acquisition of public purposes for permanent period. Here following procedures should be followed. 1. Social impact assessment, preliminary notification, declaration of government, issue of notice to parties, payment of compensation, rehabilitation and resettlement scheme, and proceedings for acquisition. What is the objective of the Land Acquisition Act? It ensures transparent process of acquiring land. This act ensures minimum displacement of the existing population or owner of the land. This act provides fair compensation to the families whose land has been acquired or livelihood has been affected because of land acquisition. The act provides adequate provision for rehabilitation and resettlement of lands families affected. Consent under Land Acquisition Act. When the government acquires the land for public purposes and control the land directly, the landowner's consent is not required, not needed. When the land is acquired for setting up private companies, the consent of at least 80% of the affected family is mandatory. If the project is undertaken through a public-private partnership, then 70% of the affected families have to give their consent for the land acquisition process. Now, acquisition of land for public purposes. Acquisition of land public purposes means what? Public purpose includes purpose in which the general interest of the community is opposed to the interest of the individual. Here, general interest of the community is the primary importance. Interest of the individual is negligible. Public purpose means acquisition of land for national interest or defense purposes. Public purpose includes housing development projects for the poor. Public purpose includes housing projects for the people affected by the natural calamities. Public purpose includes programs such as conservation, economic development, education, parks, recreation, public health, public safety, programs of assistance to the homeless and poor, and programs for old age people. Now, what is the meaning of public purpose? For any purpose, work relating to the state or national security or defense services. It includes naval, military, air force, or any other armed forces of state or central government, or construction of well or construction of jail premises. Second, acquisition of land for building public infrastructure. What is infrastructure projects? These projects notified by the government by ministry like transport, laying pipeline, energy, roads and bridges, electricity generation, tunnels, educational institution, water supply, telecommunication, hospitals, three-star hotels in national, state highway and hospitals. But it excludes private hospitals and private educational institutions and private hotels. Third one, acquisition of land, the project involving agriculture or allied industries such as dairy, fisheries, meat procuring by government or by farmers cooperatives. It includes projects involving agro processing, supply of inputs to agriculture, warehouse and cold storage facility, and market for agriculture or allied industry. Acquisition of land for industrial corridors, manufacturing zone, mining activities and other projects. It includes water harvesting, water conservation, research schools and institutions, sports and cultural activity, healthcare, tourism, space program or improvement of village sites, creating housing projects for the poor or landless people affected by the natural calamity. Acquisition of land for project affected family. Project affected family means those who lost their living because of acquisition. Because of acquisition, they lost their land, they lost their livelihood, and they were displaced. Who are the project affected family? Owner of the land, tenants, laborers, sharecroppers, agricultural laborers in tribal area, tribal people who depend on forest income, honey collectors, bird collectors, leaf collectors. They are all project affected family members. Thank you.